What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Weekend Roundup here on Touchline Talk. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content I put out every single week. Only one place to start. That is what happened in the Arsenal-Newcastle game. Two different VAR situations. Bruno Guimaraes, the elbow to the head of Jorginho, and then, of course, Anthony Gordon's goal and the triple VAR review. I'm going to start with the goal and kind of work backward. Was the ball out? Maybe, maybe not. I have learned, and I hope most people have, not to trust the stills that people put out on social media, to trust all of the angles when it's not clearly the perfect angle. And the one I was seeing was not a great angle. It looked like the ball was out, but that doesn't mean the ball's out. I have no problem with that call being left. Because if it's not a clear and obvious area you are completely confident in, you should leave the call. It looked like it was out, but I don't know for sure. And nobody does. Second, the offside. I am still confused. It looked offside to me. I will maybe give the referees the benefit of the doubt, although after the Luis Diaz situation, maybe not so much, that there is a reason why that was called offside and that the angles got, again, a little bit distorted and it's not as clear as it looks, or that I just missed something. I can see how that one can also stay and that you stick with the call on the field. The third one is the one that I have the biggest issue with, because ultimately the other two are more black and white. Either the ball was out or it wasn't. Either he was offside or he was not. Offside is not 100% black and white. There is some gray involved, but generally speaking, it's more of a finite thing. The third one is subjective. And so I feel like we have to trust that the referees got the first two right, in the sense that there was not enough to overturn. That to me is a foul. Again, it's subjective. There are plenty of people who don't think it was a foul, and in which case there is an argument for all three standing and for that goal being awarded. And I acknowledge that. The bigger point I want to get to, and the thing that really irked me about all of this, is that there have been penalties given and things VAR has awarded that were much less egregious than Joe Linton's push on Gabriel in the lead up to that goal. Everybody is sitting here talking about how I'm not one, maybe it wasn't a clear and obvious error to the point where you have to overturn the call. And my response to that is, and I have been saying this on weekend roundups and on this YouTube channel for a while, since it was started, basically. Since when has the Premier League actually implemented a high bar where they are literally interpreting clear and obvious error as the words are supposed to mean? It must be at least 5 different times I've talked about this on here. And I know I talked about it a couple weeks ago with Curtis Jones and that red card in the Luis Diaz game. To me, that was not a clear and obvious error that should have been overturned, because I have a very high personal bar. And even with my very high personal bar, that's a foul, and that goal should have been disallowed for Newcastle. But I feel like we're moving the goalpost here. That's the big thing about all of this for me. And why I do have a lot of sympathy for Mikel Arteta. Because to me, this is finally the inconsistency of the Premier League, and the Premier League not clearly defining what clear and obvious means coming back to hurt a team. Because we've been talking about, did they get the call right? And I have been saying, and I'll say it again, that is not the question we should be asking. If you take clear and obvious error at its literal interpretation, the question is, was there an egregious mistake made that needs to be fixed? Not whether the call was right or wrong. And now all of a sudden, that's the bar we're applying to this. But I don't feel like we've been applying that at any point in the Premier League. And there was that little period of time where they were supposed to implement a higher bar in terms of overturning things with VAR, and then that kind of went away. You see all kinds of stuff that it's probably a penalty, or it's probably a handball, or it's probably a foul, or whatever it is. They get overturned, even though it's not 100% agreement across the board that the call was wrong. You can't just change that here on a play where you have 3 separate incidents that I would argue to the naked eye all look like they were wrong. That doesn't mean they all were. But where was this conversation with all of these other VAR incidents? Because I haven't really heard people talking like this. But all of a sudden now it's the only explanation as to why this happened. Is that, well, there's a case that they weren't, all 3 of them were not clear and obvious errors. Which I generally agree with. But that's not the standard we've been using. Then you've got the red card situation with Bruno Guimaraes. That one I have nothing for. That's a red card. There's no argument that it was accidental. He clearly saw what Jorginho in front of him. He knew what he was doing. Forcible contact to the head. I don't know how they missed that. That's a straight up mistake. The other ones, there's at least some nuance in there. For me, there is no conversation to be had about Bruno Guimaraes. That's a red. He should have been off. In addition to all the other incidents in the game. And the other part of this is it seems like part of the reason why these calls were not overturned, on the goal in particular, is because they just didn't have good enough angles. And they just didn't have the visual evidence they needed to be very confident that clear and obvious error was made. I've talked about how that's moving goalposts, but there's another part of it too, which is the Premier League simply needs to do better. And this is where I do agree with Mikel Arteta, and I hope that, well, his comments were not great for the integrity of the league and for officiating, that somebody does step up and do something about this. Because if that is the primary reason, and I feel like we're going to get more of this in the coming days, as I'm recording this on Sunday afternoon, but if the primary reason was the visual evidence wasn't good enough, then that has to change. Because you've got to provide the officials with the tools needed to make those kind of decisions. There's too much technology, too many cameras out there to be unsure in those situations about what actually happened. That is a very valid complaint. Because that is not about a call going against you. That is, the referees aren't being supported the way they need to. So we're going to have to wait and see what PGMOL has to say on this and kind of the long-term implication, not long-term implications, but how this plays out, just like the Luis Diaz situation in terms of the days following and how the league handles this. And I am somebody, and I've said this before, I don't like having these conversations. Because the reality is, Arsenal could have just gotten a goal and at least prevented them from losing based on one decision that went against them. A lot of this is in the players and the coaches' controls. And we generally, as a sports community, really like to put all of the blame on the officials and the referees and not give them any credit when they're right. And I'm trying not to continue to play into that. But there are times where the refereeing needs to be highlighted and there needs to be accountability, and this is one of those times for me. But more specifically, it's just this idea of what is the bar? Can the Premier League finally actually define it? Because I have been saying for a while that we're not actually playing by the rules we say we're playing by in terms of clear and obvious error in the literal interpretation. If that's not the bar, then define it in a way that actually makes sense. And so now you get this situation that highlights that perfectly, where the explanation seems to be we're using this clear and obvious error bar, but it has not been applied consistently. And so Arsenal ultimately, in my eyes, from what I know as I'm recording this video, simply paid the price for the Premier League's inconsistency and inability to define how it's going to use VAR. To me, the best way to use VAR is to set that high bar with it and say it is not there to re-referee games. It is there to fix obvious errors. Generally, everybody can agree should have been fixed, so that those famous moments of missed referee calls, Diego Maradona's hand of God goal, or whichever one you want to point to, those can get fixed so that nobody feels like Liverpool did after that goal was taken off and it was a correct goal. That's what VAR is supposed to fix. VAR is not supposed to be re-refereeing. But the Premier League has gotten that all muddied, and so now you have this situation here. We'll have to see kind of what happens moving forward, but those are some of my thoughts. Other thing I want to mention real quickly, Der Klassiker. Bayern scored twice early. Harry Kane adds goals 2 and 3 to complete his hat trick late on. It's a 4-0 win for Bayern. And so really there are only two things coming out of this for me, because there's nothing to say about the game. I've said all of this before. If you're going to dethrone Bayern, part of that formula is not losing 6 points in head-to-head. And Dortmund almost found a way to do it without that part of the formula last season, because Bayern were that bad relative to their normal standard. That was not Dortmund rising to Bayern's level. That was Bayern stooping down to Dortmund, and Dortmund still couldn't take advantage. That's not the case this season. Dortmund are doing fine. Bayern are looking really, really good and added Harry Kane. And from a point standpoint, they are on pace for a really, really good season, better than usual. Now, it's early. Is this the best Bayern team in the last decade? No, I don't think so. But they just dismantled Dortmund while being shorthanded. So the first part of this is Dortmund simply missed their opportunity last season. And this game was the final reinforcement of that you're going to have to go match Bayern. Bayern's not coming down to open the door for you again. The second part of this that I do want to mention, because I haven't really talked about them, is that there is a team that is currently matching Bayern's level that I do think can make this title race interesting still, and that is Bayer Leverkusen. They are perfect in all competitions outside of a draw at Bayern. Head-to-head, good result, didn't let Bayern take all 3 points at home. That is how you stay competitive in this league. That is how you actually beat Bayern. Again, it's early. We got to see if Leverkusen can keep this up. But that was the overall story of that game for me, is that Dortmund had their opportunity last season when Bayern handed it to them. They couldn't take advantage. Now somebody's going to have to actually take this league from Bayern. That's not going to be Dortmund this season. Maybe it's Bayer Leverkusen. We're going to have to wait and see. That is all for the weekend roundup. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. Got plenty of coverage coming next weekend for the NWSL final, the championship game. So much going on this weekend. I wanted to focus more on Europe, and then I will get back to MLS and NWSL more next weekend, hopefully, and we'll definitely have a recap video after the NWSL championship game. So be on the lookout for that. Again, thank you for tuning in, and I will see you next time.